You're here because you want to know why is everything so freaking expensive in the United States. My name's Adam Scott, financial professional, master teacher, and multi-million-dollar entrepreneur. We're going to talk about that right now. Look, this whole story starts with something called the national debt. The United States government owes $39 trillion to people in the U.S. and outside the U.S. Where does that come from? How did it get there? And why is it important? The national debt comes from the sum total of budget deficits. What in the heck is a budget deficit? Every year, the United States government spends money. If it spends more money than it takes in taxes, it has a budget deficit. It has to either borrow money from somebody locally or somebody abroad. When you add all of those budget deficits together, you get the national debt. Now, right now you're thinking, I came here to think about why is everything so expensive? This hasn't answered my question. Don't worry, we're getting to it. When the United States government has to borrow money, it goes to the private funding markets. It has to go borrow money from some type of financial institution or an individual. To do that, it has to pay an interest rate. An interest rate is the price of money. As a borrower, typically lower interest rates are better. However, when the want or need or desire for any type of product, including loans, increases, that increases the price. Thus, if the government goes to these private markets and says, hey, we'd like to borrow some money, it's going to over time increase the interest rate. Because the United States government continues to do this and has done this for a very, very long time, there is upward pressure on interest rates. When the interest rate is higher, what does that mean? It means when you go to the store, when you go to buy a car, to buy a house, or maybe borrow money to go to college, you're going to have a higher interest rate than if the opposite were the case. So you're going to pay more money per month for that car, for that house, or to go to college. If your payment is higher, that directly affects you. You have to pay more money every month out of your pocket. However, here's where things get tricky. At the national level, when the government borrows money, the individuals who are borrowing the money for the U.S. government, it's not their money they have to use to repay that debt. It's the taxpayers' money, or in many cases, it's your children or your grandchildren's money through future taxation. They don't have a personal incentive to keep interest rates low by restraining their borrowing and competing for dollars at a lower price. They're just told, hey, go fund these programs that the United States Congress enacts so that we can deliver money to those peoples and organizations that we have legally promised to receive those funds. Let's get to the next step. When the government is borrowing money and delivering it through different programs, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, tax credits, whatever it is, that's putting more money into the economy. What that ends up doing is that creates upward pressure on demand. The concept of aggregate demand is the total purchasing power of all people in the United States or in any one country. When aggregate demand for any country goes up, it's going to increase the price level. And the price level, when it goes up, causes inflation. So there's two factors that are impacting your life directly. Inflation is still positive, meaning the price level is increasing, and you have upward pressure on interest rates, which makes borrowing less attractive for individuals. So you're seeing multiple effects that directly affect your budget, your purchases, and potentially future loan payments. The next logical question is, why does the United States government borrow all this money? Why doesn't it just fix it? There's two ways to fix a budget deficit and eventually to correct the national debt. Taxation increases or spending decreases, both of which are generally unpopular. Increasing taxes takes money out of individuals' pockets, and decreasing spending takes money directly out of the hands of typically people's jobs, things like people in the medical system, people at military bases, or other government-supported, subsidized, or funded programs. It directly impacts people. And when there's a direct impact on people, it impacts typically voters. And voters, when they're unhappy, tend to not vote for politicians. So there's an incentive structure in place. Politicians don't want to raise taxes and they don't want to decrease spending because they typically will lose their job in Congress as a result. So we have this incentive structure at play that is continuing and perpetuating this problem where the government keeps borrowing money, it keeps pushing up interest rates, and it continues to spend, and you see inflationary pressure in the United States. Well, wait, there's more. If we're going to address this as a country, what we have to consider is how the programs that people use this money for is related to both our behaviors and to our government. Here's how this works. Individuals in the United States typically use government funding or government spends money on two main things, healthcare and the military. So logically, fighting fewer wars or spending less money on the military and decreasing spending on medical care is a way to address that issue. Both of these issues are extremely politically contentious, but one we can get into right now is especially healthcare costs. Healthcare costs are related to the sum totals of our behaviors. What does that mean? Because health insurance and healthcare programs aggregate the cost of healthcare and spread it out across all plan participants, or in the case of something like Medicare or Medicaid, across all participants in those programs, what it means is the individual health choices we make, we might receive the benefits of those healthcare systems at a reduced cost. So if you go to the doctor and you have some type of subsidized health insurance, maybe you don't pay quite as much as the full cost of that care. But the cost of that care is then spread out across the entire system. Now, our individual choices thus add up to greater social costs. I don't know if I'm making a play yet, so let me dive even further. If you smoke cigarettes and you get lung cancer and you go to the doctor and say, well, I have insurance, my insurance should cover the cost of this care, who's going to pay for that? The care still costs what it costs. What that means is all the other people on the insurance plan, whether it's a private insurance plan or a government-supported insurance plan, they're the ones that are going to be subsidizing that unhealthy person. Let's keep digging. In the United States, about 80 to 90% of people, according to the CDC, have chronic conditions. Now, some of those are genetic, but many of them are lifestyle choices. Things like smoking, physical inactivity, alcoholism, obesity, or type 2 diabetes, which can be a result of obesity and health or nutrition choices. Those things all have a large social cost, but individuals don't have to pay for the costs themselves. Everyone else has to pay for it. It's a lot easier for someone when they get sick to say, hey, the government should just take care of it, or other people in my insurance company should just take care of it, instead of directing their attention inward and saying the actions that I take individually are having economic consequences for me and society. So if we start to understand that our economic choices lead to economic results, whether it's with our health or whether it's with our personal budget, whatever it may be, those things add up to our national situation. As a society, if we have millions of people or hundreds of millions of people that are making poor financial choices or poor health choices, and they're relying on incentives in systems that are extremely expensive, for which the United States has to borrow money, it's going to continue that cycle. And then you're saying, Adam, I thought you were going to talk about why everything is so expensive. If this cycle continues where the US government still has to borrow money, it's going to continue the cycle of unaffordability, because it's only going to continue making interest rates high and inflation increase. But wait, what if we drop interest rates? We have something called the Federal Reserve System, which is a private-public partnership between the banking system and the government. What if the Federal Reserve System just lowers interest rates, as that is a tool that they try to use? Well, what they'll do is they will buy government bonds. When government debt is issued to fund all of these programs, they create a bond. It's an IOU. And the way the Federal Reserve System adjusts interest rates through the banking system is to buy those bonds in credit banks with additional cash on their books. Hold on. We're getting kind of detailed here. How does this all connect? If there's more cash in the economy or more cash on banks' accounts, on their reserve accounts, it's going to eventually lead to more lending and to more money circulating throughout the economy and a boost in aggregate demand. And that's right, more upward pressure on prices. So this cycle that we have found ourselves in is extremely self-reinforcing. And it's as a result primarily of Americans' desire to have things that we societally cannot afford, because we've been living way beyond our means for way too long. And the politicians in the United States are incentivized through the electoral system to not change anything. So the only two outcomes that could happen based on current incentive structures are the United States government continues to borrow money to go into debt, which drives interest rates sequentially higher, making things even more unaffordable, or that the Federal Reserve System tries to lower interest rates artificially through their banking policies, flooding the system with cash, causing rampant inflation, making things unaffordable. So those two current structural options, neither one of them works. The only thing that can fix this problem is most likely if Americans change their behavior and change the things that they need from their systems. If they need less medical care, if they need less government support through different programs, if they need to buy fewer things because they are restraining their spending, and none of it is politically palatable. It's not even socially palatable because people don't like to have to figure out how they need to change things. Please let me know what questions you have. Drop your answers down below or questions down below. My name's Adam Scott. I'm glad you're here. Stick around. I'll see you next time.